Are you using webinars to sell more of your course or product, but noticing that attendees drop off before the webinar is even ended? You're not alone. In this video, I'm breaking down the 3 main drop-off points on why attendees leave and how to get them to stay longer and convert higher from, because these are costing you conversions and potential customers because of it. So let's dive in. So for most people, their webinar is usually around 45 minutes to an hour. If you're amazing, it's under that. And there's usually about 45 to 60 to sometimes even more slides. Now, inside of that, there are usually people who've had webinars, are learning from people who teach the webinars, and the people who teach the webinars usually have a similar structure in pretty much all of them. So these 3 main drop-off points you can find in pretty much every single webinar, whichever type you learn, whether it's you're doing one that's more lesson focused, more tip focused, more aha focused. Like there's different options on the types of webinars you're doing, from the topics to even like how you're structuring the middle teaching portion, but the beginning and end are pretty much the same. And that's actually a lot of where the drop-off points happen. So talking about the first drop-off point is gonna be your story. This can be kind of painful to hear, but for a lot of us, we make our stories in webinars way too long. I remember looking at a client of mine who had her webinar for a pretty successful program she ran, but she wanted to update her webinar because she knew that she was missing out on some really good conversions. So when I was watching her entire webinar to take notes, her story portion of the webinar was 7 minutes long. 7 minutes. And although people do want to know about you and you need that to help to create more of that credibility, people just take it way too long and make it too much about themselves. Because at the end of the day, if you're running a business, this is about helping someone else solve their problem. So the first thing that you really have to realize for your story, it's not that you have to cut the entire thing. It's not about letting you out of the story, but it's about really highlighting the main things that matter to your people, both from a relation standpoint, so what makes them feel that emotion, that connection to you, but also the credibility. So if you can, looking at your story, if it is long, if you're doing a recorded webinar, then you probably can see how long it is. Even if you're doing live webinars as well, that's fine too. But try and clock how long it takes you to get through the story that you have. Now, again, this is not about fully changing your things, but if you want to help people actually get farther to the webinars, they actually get to your pitch, then you need to start here. Because I can tell you, this is the first and most often drop-off point that I see in people's webinar still, after I think over a decade now that webinars have been taught. So the way to approach this to help with better conversions is to redo your story from the lens of your person. So think about it when you're hearing someone's story and try this out. Not like someone who is like inherently interesting or novel, who you already know, like a Steve Jobs or a Oprah, but someone who just type into a podcast and find a random person you've never heard who has like a moderately interesting topic you want to hear about, and see how long it takes you to listen to their story when you tap out, when your brain starts to go into other things. You can then see how long it's going to take your people to kind of drop off too. Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're worse. I have a lot of clients, and even myself, who have a lot of neurodivergent tendencies. So for us, engagement is really hard. So having those super long stories can actually be the reason why we drop off, because our brains are just wanting to move to the next thing. So try those things out first to get a baseline on what your story, how long your story is. Second thing, once you realize that, is start to comb through your story and say what points really matter that will create the connection deepest and also help with the credibility. And usually for a lot of people, there's like one main milestone in their challenge, and there's 1 or 2 main results they have. And start focusing on those and shorten it. And if you need to, use ChatGPT or something to help you to really understand the things to change. You can still have those other points you had, but keep them on the screen for other people to read, which also helps with engagement because it gives them something else to do beyond listening to you. That will help out with your story. And if you need to, make sure that you're also connecting your milestones or whatever you're changing to be around the pain points that they have too, so that they can see themselves in you. Because you have to remember, these people aren't where you're at. They're at your before. And a lot of times people think it's too good to be true. So if you can really relate to them and really show them that you have been in there before, or your clients have too, you're gonna be farther ahead. So first drop-off point is that. Please focus on that. If nothing else, that will really, really, really help out your drop-off point. Other things too, if you want to, is if you have any type of best performing reels or content that you did share your story, see which ones did best and start to emulate that in your copy. You could even have that reel or TikTok show on your webinar to help it feel more engaging and to help it loop too. You have the nuggets in your data and also how you operate and how you show up that allows you to see the starting points for webinars. And also your data will show it too. If you look inside of EverWebinar, Webinar Jam, even Kajabi, they all have those video rates that show you the drop-off points. And you'll see a drastic point down around the 5-minute mark, sometimes even higher or lower, depending on where you have your story put. For most people, it is within that like 5 to 10 minutes is when people start the stories, because usually you say welcome, you go into why should they care to be here, what they'll learn, and then you go into your story. How do I know that? Because I've watched so many of them and I've helped people create them. So make sure that you're looking at that point and also confirm it with your data. Confirm it with those platforms and those analytics you're able to see. If you have them, if you don't, then you can just use this as a best practice to begin with. Now, drop off number 2 is actually usually right after your first tip or your first aha. Again, the middle of teaching is kind of where everyone does it differently. So some people focus on like the 5 main secrets that you learn XYZ for, the 5 main tips that you do ABC, whatever is that for you is fine. But for most people, they're doing some type of like multi-lesson or multi-step thing. So whatever that is for you, usually after the first step, sometimes second too, is where the second drop off will happen. So your story is number 1, but this would be number 2, where after they've listened to you teach, usually again, based off of webinar structure, it's gonna be that tip. Usually you show a client testimonial and then you show also data points too, or some type of way to create credibility for what you're saying. So that's why that can take so long, is because for most people who are teaching a webinar, especially because you're doing it to sell something, it's not just the tip itself that you're teaching. You're also adding each one of them with a client testimonial, some other things too to help with the sales psychology to get them to buy, which is fine. We have to realize that some people are just naturally gonna get tired of that, especially after the second tip where they start to realize the structure of what you're doing is the same. It's hard for people to want to stick around. So if you want to try and help that, especially if you don't already have a playback speed on your webinar, then I highly recommend you to add in some type of added engagement here. This is where you can say something like, now I know you're halfway through, I know this can be tough to continue watching, or you're feeling like you have 10 other things going on. So what I want you to do is do ABC, or I want you to know your hard work will pay off because you're gonna get a bonus at the end, which is only 10 minutes away. Obviously, it's harder to say if you haven't done this launch before, the webinar before, to know how many minutes it'll be away. But you could even say it'll be 9 slides away, 10 slides away. That allows people to kind of have their brain brace for how much longer this will take them. And you hear me talk about this a lot more in the how to create an upsell page in Kajabi, because it's a very similar sentiment, where if you're able to show, let's say you have multiple upsells you're doing, showing step 1 of 2 in terms of this is the first upsell, okay, we have 1 more, and then what that means we have to go in the thank you page. Visually showing people the steps, or like how long it will take, allows people to better brace and stick around longer. So I recommend doing something like that, which is a very easy thing you can add in. The other ways are obviously trying to add in, if it's a live launch, having a point here for questions, also reminding them things like, all right, we're halfway in, make sure you're also sipping water, take a quick second. Those added things shows that you're human and allows them to think, oh, she actually cares about me, or they actually care about me, and let me go do that and then bring me back. It's also creating some type of visual change or pattern interrupt that they need, because they're gonna probably get just mentally tired from watching the same thing over and over. Even though you have different slides, it's the same kind of like cadence, because most people talk in a similar cadence the entire time. And if you need more of an actual example, you could say something that is a cliffhanger type of style, which creates curiosity, which says, in 5 slides from now, I'll show you the one thing that doubled my conversions overnight. That kind of allows them to hook into and brace, knowing there's something better coming, because most people know at this point with webinars, there's gonna be a pitch at the end, but if there's something of value that's still free that they get soon, they're gonna stick around longer. Now, the final drop off shouldn't be much of a surprise, but it's when the pitch happens. And that's normally to be understood. Most people know that they're usually on here for the free value, with a small percentage who are ready and willing to buy immediately. That's amazing, we love that. There's also people who need more information, and that's why those email funnels, the email sequences afterwards really matter. But let's try and just see how we can help out the people who are still on the fence, who might actually buy but need a little bit more information, and help them to stick around longer. So the main things you need to know about why this is happening is because either one, the audience feels like this is becoming a little bit more forced or pushed, or very abrupt, like you went from we're talking about fun things to you need this. Like it can be very abrupt. The other option, which is unfortunately the more popular option, which is that your audience doesn't actually see the value as much as you think they do. So they don't actually think that the pitch is now outweighing the amount of value they got at the beginning of the webinar. And this is actually pretty common because most people create webinars that are a little bit fluffy. They do it where it's just like reiterating the same adage, the same secrets over and over again. And although that can be helpful if you do have people who are beginners in your industry where they haven't watched a lot of webinars or video series before, but in case they have, you're gonna run into that issue where they're gonna be naturally skeptical of, was this really valuable or aha inducing, light bulb moment inducing enough to where it feels like, okay, the program is probably gonna be a lot more worth it. I would say out of the hundreds of webinars I've watched, at the start of them, I would say maybe 10 of them were actually valuable enough that would get people to say, oh wow, I need this immediately because the value that you gave in this webinar was so good I had to go. So a lot of this is gonna be first acknowledging, is this value that you're giving actually value? Not just information, but giving them some type of quick win or aha moment that they didn't have before your webinar, because that's gonna be the thing that keeps them around and allows them to wanna hear out your pitch. Now, there are other ways that people try and do where they say, wait for the bonus, and the bonus is always after the pitch, which is fine. But for a lot of times, solving that issue will solve a lot of your pitch issue as well. Yes, there are definitely ways to help your pitch to convert better and actually communicate the value clearer. That is something I help out with in the one section sales page upgrade and a lot of what I do with one-to-one clients. But for a lot of people, this is the first step. And it's not really the funnest step because it's not like, wow, we just have to say these 5 things, this SOP, Russell Brunson style is gonna work for sure, because it's not always going to. And I don't like saying that, but I wanna be honest here that there's also gonna be times where your audience doesn't prefer a long format style webinar. I have clients of mine, and even for some of my businesses, where doing webinars didn't work well because my ideal client was time strapped. They are busy business owners. They are people who lack time more than they lack money. I mean, everyone wants more money, but you know what I mean. Same thing with people who have an ideal client of busy moms or parents. We can't always expect them to sit down and watch a 45-minute plus webinar. It's not feasible in today's time, especially with how bad attention is. So after you do these tweaks first, acknowledge and see, did it help out? Look at your data. Be able to see the up and down rate if your webinar did better in terms of less drop off in those main points. If it didn't, then there might need to be a conversation around redoing the messaging around the pitching, but also possibly changing your sales vehicle to be more of a short form video series or some type of other different medium to communicate the value better and people actually ingest it better than a strictly just webinar funnel. I don't think webinars are inherently bad, but they're not always the right choice, especially in today's day and age where everyone's busy, lacking attention, and just trying to survive. So try out these things first, and if that still doesn't work, we need to revisit the bigger issues around the actual pitch itself and then the way it's being communicated inside of the vehicle of a webinar. So hopefully this gives you a good starting point. I hope now knowing these 3 drop-off points will allow you to look at your webinar from a lot more of a conversion-focused lens and allow you to generate more customers because you know the main points on why they're leaving and what to do to keep them to stick around longer, to hear you out for the pitch, and to convert from it as well. So if you found this video helpful and want even more information around how to convert more people into your funnel, especially if you use emails as well and other pages and sales pages, make sure to like and subscribe because I do videos like this every 2 weeks just to help you convert more of your people, because people need what you have, but just sometimes need to be shown it and told it in a way that gets them to understand and say yes faster and stick around with you for longer. So until the next video, happy selling, and I'll talk to you then.